There are many different characters who show up in the scriptures out of nowhere, perform a function, and disappear just as mysteriously as they arrived. And among my favorites have always been these visitors who come to Jesus today. We know next to nothing about them. Matthew only gives us scanty details. First of all, he says they're magi, and the word literally means wise men. So obviously we know they were wise. Sometimes they're referred to as astrologers. Obviously, since they knew something about the star and they had followed it, there was no question that that was part of their mindset. We traditionally call them the kings because we connect them with the prophet Isaiah and the Psalms, who also talk about kings coming bearing gold and frankincense. And maybe they were kings. They may have been both kings who were wise men. We don't know. We don't know how many there were. Traditionally, we speak of three, and tradition has given the names of Melchior, Caspar, and Balthasar. And I know the cathedral in Cologne, Germany, claims to have the relics of the three kings. And that might be true, but Matthew doesn't tell us specifically how many. We don't really know where they came from. He says they came from the east. Half the world is east of Israel. They could have come from anywhere. We know basically only two things. They were not Jews. These were Gentiles, pagan peoples, and they saw the star at its rising, and they came and worshiped Jesus. That's all we know for sure about it. But in that, there's enough pieces we can put together to understand something about these people. Now, wherever they came from, of course, back in those days, they couldn't just, as somebody today, just hop on a plane and go to Ben Gurion Airport and take the little shuttle to Bethlehem, the tourist shuttle that they have, as people can do today when the political situation is safe enough. No, they had to travel, probably on camelback, but travel a long distance and through the desert. Inevitably, they had to cross a desert to find Jesus in Bethlehem. And of course, the desert is very hot by day, and if they were in fact following the star, if it was leading them all the way, then they had to travel the desert by night. And the desert is very cold at night, and there are bandits and wild animals and all sorts of other dangers that could prey upon them while they were out there. So it was a very difficult journey with no street lights, no stop signs along the way pointing, this way to Bethlehem or anything like that. They had to find it by their own skills. And on top of that, the difficulty alone maybe sometimes might have made them decide, this is not worth the effort, let's just go back home. But when they went to the caravan routes along the way, and people asked them, where you're going, and they're saying, well, we're following the star, and it's leading us to a newborn king, I'm sure there must have been some people who mocked them. You're doing what? You're following a star? You're traveling the desert by night? And you're going to find a newborn king, a baby? And what is he going to do? Give you a post in his government? Teach you all the wisdom of the world? You're going through all this trouble for what? You call yourselves wise men? Well, we think you're being pretty foolish here. And there must have been people who ridiculed them. But they kept up with it. And they didn't even completely understand the fullness of where they were to go or what was revealed to them, because they showed up finally in Jerusalem and went to the court of King Herod, assuming that maybe Herod's wife or one of his daughters-in-law had given birth to a boy who was going to be the king one day. And of course, Herod knows nothing about it. And they're probably very surprised about that. And of course, Herod is worried. Even though Herod was at the end of his life, he was a paranoid man. And as we know, that he was so threatened by this newborn king, even though he would be long dead before this child could ever be old enough to be the king and rule over Israel. Nevertheless, we know that he's troubled by it and tries to use the wise men to find out where Jesus is, not so that he can adore him, but so that he can kill him. And they are sent out. And then we hear that the star which they see at its rising went before them. And that's when we know for sure it led them right to the place where Jesus was. And when they entered the house, they saw Jesus with Mary. And they did something that Matthew mentions that I have never seen in any artwork or in any nativity set anywhere. They prostrated themselves before the Lord. Normally, we see images of the wise men kneeling before Jesus and presenting their gifts. But no, Matthew says they prostrated themselves. That means lying face down flat on the floor. before him. And that's a sign of obeisance, of absolute, total surrender of self to another. Basically, these men were saying, I am nothing, you, baby Jesus, are everything. Now think of the significance of that. They were magi, wise men, certainly representing the wisdom of the world. And if they were kings, they were also political rulers. Look at the significance of that moment. All the world's wisdom and all the governing power of the world prostrate, face down, flat before Jesus, saying, we are nothing, you are everything. Oh, what a wonderful image. If only we could see that today. If only we could see the wisdom of the world and the leaders of the world acknowledging that Jesus is everything, and what are we? We are nothing. Unfortunately, too often, it's often the reverse. World wisdom and leaders who puff themselves up as the most important, as the most wise, and the most learned of people, and lead people so far astray. Oh, only if people could be like the wise men, our rulers in every way, realizing Christ has the truth. And I share in that truth only insofar as I share in what Christ teaches. And if we could only prostrate ourselves before the Lord and say, Lord, I know that I am nothing and you are everything. What a beautiful image that was. And then, of course, the wise men presented those gifts to the child Jesus, which are very unusual gifts. I think if you were to visit somebody today who had just given birth, you probably would bring some very practical things, maybe some blankets, diapers, rattles, toys for the child to play with. That would be the normal thing, but they gave very strange gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And actually, one of the apocryphal Gospels mentions that there was actually a fourth wise man, but the Blessed Mother turned him away for bringing a fruitcake. Okay. Don't quit your day job, I know. But looking back at those gifts they gave, they were very significant gifts. First of all, gold. Anytime in the ancient world one king visited another in peace, he brought gold to represent or acknowledge his authority as a king. It was a tribute to show this was an earthly king. So by bringing gold to the baby Jesus, they're showing he was an earthly king. Frankincense, incense, like we still use at worship to this very day, for worship of God, showing that this child who was a human king was also divine, God himself in the flesh. And then that strangest gift of all, myrrh, an embalming perfume, a very bitter, strong-scented perfume that was used to use when a body had died, when they were preparing it for burial, to cover the smell of the decaying flesh. And so in the myrrh, it signified that this divine God would suffer for his people. And so those beautiful symbolism of those gifts. And then, of course, they were warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, and they went back to their own country, their own way. And today's Feast of the Epiphany was one of the earliest ones that the church ever began to celebrate. After celebrating every Sunday as a day celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, in the earliest days of the church, one of the first events in his life that they thought was worthy of a special celebration of its own was the Epiphany. God revealed for all the world to see, as the word Epiphany means. And here, while we see the shepherds representing Israel, the Jewish people adoring Jesus, now the wise men are the Gentiles, the pagan world, all the foreign world coming and adoring Jesus, laying their gifts before him. And so they realized that the message with which they had been entrusted was to go out to the whole world. And they were called to go out, they realized, to be people that were wise men themselves, following the light of faith to find Jesus. And you and I are called to do the same thing, to be wise men, to follow that light of faith to find Jesus. And like the journey of the wise men, sometimes our journey will be difficult. There will be dangers along the way. There will be people who will mock and ridicule us, especially today, for the things we believe in the year 2024. They'll just dismiss us as irrelevant. And there will be people who will try to misuse our knowledge for their own personal gain, like Herod tried to do. There will be troubles along the way. And sometimes people might ask us as Christians, why do you do it? And the answer is because when you find Christ, it's worth all the effort. Just what we have in knowing him. And we have something far greater than the wise men had. When the wise men found Jesus, he was an infant. He couldn't speak to them. He couldn't bless them. He couldn't teach them. But we have the wisdom of the teaching of Jesus that has been passed down to us, the truth that he gave us to change the world, to correct this world that is under its own power being led to destruction and lead it instead to salvation, the salvation he won for us by his suffering, death, and resurrection. And we receive his body and blood in the Eucharist so that we are one with him, already sharing the glory here on earth that we will share with him in heaven when our life is over, and in the new creation when he raises us from the dead. We have the knowledge of all of that. And so discovering that, and when it truly sinks in our hearts and in our minds, and we realize the wonderful gift we have in Christ, we say, wow, what a beautiful gift. And the journey of faith that we struggle with every day, we say is well worth it, because we have found reason. We have found the answers. We have found meaning in the midst of this turbulent world that is so fraught with anger, with violence, with so much hatred. We have found love. We have found meaning. And we have found the way to change the world. And we also realize then that we are called not only to be the wise men, but being the light of faith, like that star guiding other would-be wise men to Christ. As I mentioned before, when they went to the caravan stopping places, I'm sure there were some people who probably mocked them, but I wonder if there were others who said, you know what, these are not unintelligent men. These are wise people. Maybe they're onto something. And I wonder if there were others who joined in their entourage and came and found the Lord Jesus. And if so, then they followed the journey of the wise men and they found the Lord. And you and I are called to be that light of faith to lead other would-be wise men to the Lord. How many people do we know? How often do we hear in the world people complaining about the horrible situation in the world that's only getting worse, and looking for meaning, looking for truth, looking for happiness, looking for something to help them make sense of this situation we live in that we call living each and every day? And you and I have the answer right here, the gospel of Christ. Christ gives us the reason. He shows us the way to make everything work. Do you realize, my friends, you and I have the answer to all the world's problems right here in the gospel of Jesus, in his body and blood, in everything we celebrate Sunday after Sunday, many of us day after day. We have the answer to all the world's problems. And the Lord tells us now just to go out and be his epiphany. Share him with the world. Let all the world know that God has come into our world and taught us the truth and given us the way to make the world better. I wonder how many people are driving by our church as we speak today, as we worship, needing desperately what you and I have here. And all they need is somebody to point it out to them, to say, if you're looking for truth, you're looking for meaning, then you're looking for Christ. Come and find him. And for us to be the light, to lead other people, to not be afraid to go out and bear witness to the world, as the ancient Christians did, and tell them, come and find Christ. What he's done for me, let him do for you. The Second Vatican Council, in one of its most important documents, Lumen Gentium, talked precisely about that, said that we are a light to the nations, which is literally what Lumen Gentium in Latin means. That you and I are called now to go out and be the epiphany, be Christ revealed for all the world to see. Sadly, so often, I find we are ashamed of our Catholic faith. Somehow we feel we have to apologize for it and keep it to ourselves. Don't apologize for having the truth. In fact, be proud of it. Be bold of our faith. And go out and bring Christ to everyone we know. Sure, some people will mock us. They will ridicule us. But there will be other people who will embrace it. And we will bring them to salvation. And we will help save the world one person at a time. My friends, today, we are continuing our Christmas celebration, which ends tomorrow with our Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. But as we remember the incarnate Lord, that God became flesh and dwelt in our world, now our job is, as we've been sharing in that joy in this Christmas journey, now to go out and bring Christ to all the nations, to not be afraid, to be the epiphany, to go out and help all the world know, world, you want things to be different, you want to see the solution, you want to know how to change and make the world the way it's meant to be, just find Jesus. Find him and follow him, and you will indeed discover that Christ has the answer. My friends, do not be afraid. Go out and be that light leading all the world to Christ. Go out and be his epiphany. Share by word and example the benefits that we find by following Jesus and the truth that he has now brought and tells us to share with all the world, that he has come to bring us the salvation for which the world has always longed. Go out and tell the world, rise up in splendor. Your light has come. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever.